welcome to Shaping Success with myself and Robert Watson. We are back finally. Had some technical difficulties on Monday. We tried to get it going, but it just didn't work out. So I had to update my computer, restart it, do a bunch of stuff so that we could actually hear Robert. So, Robert, how are you today? Oh, you muted yourself. So as Robert gets that, I don't know why it says Robert has muted himself, but yeah, basically we just had some technical difficulties, kind of like what we're having right now. I don't know what's going on here. I don't think I can unmute you, Robert, so you might have to. Oh, he's going out. He's going to pop back in. We'll get back to it in a second here, but we're going to talk about some stuff here shortly, and we got a comment, and I want to hear Robert's response on that. But I have been recovering from a procedure that I had a couple weeks ago. Still kind of feeling under the weather. You'll be hearing me cough a lot, and we'll see how this goes. Here comes Robert back. How about now?
Better?
Better. We got you back. All right. Perfect.
I'm telling you. And I did absolutely nothing. All of a sudden, you vanished on my screen.
Yeah, and it said that you had muted yourself, so I don't know. That's what I saw on your screen, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. We're here, and hopefully we don't have any more issues. But yeah,
there we go. Okay, now we're 100%.
Good morning, Nikki. I wanted to talk about a comment that we got about. We were talking about Doge and how the Democrats or the left are throwing temper tantrum about someone who's not elected to go through. The finances of the country and straighten things out. And it was hilarious because I got two comments on there when I saw it. But one of them that really struck me, which I thought was kind of funny, is the temper tantrum isn't about the fact that it's an unelected dude. It's the fact that he's just cutting it without like any transparency with the elected officials in Congress who have the purse. So can you tell me what you think about that person and where they get their information from? Because to me, there is a ton of transparency because everything he does, he posts on Twitter.
Yeah. I guess we just have two different versions of what they think is transparency. And I also think that if you're making it public, everything you do, I'm not suggesting that I understand everything he's doing at this point because I don't, but it does seem like he's attempting transparency.
Yeah.
I think that I watched the speech last night. Again, I just looked at the fact that the other side couldn't clap for anything.
Right.
A kid going to West Point, all things that we should be thankful for as a country in general. And it's really just, this entire partisan, my way or the highway thing. Let me tell you, it was really interesting. Barry Weiss, who used to be with the New York Times and also the Wall Street Journal, she said something really interesting. When she quit the New York Times, she wrote an op-ed piece, basically her resignation letter. And it was the idea that she suggested that progressives were having this knee-jerk reaction to authoritarianism, that they were being overly controlling, and their idea of liberal was the most illiberal thing she had ever seen.
Right.
And she said, a thinking person has to look at the situation, and she said, here, I'm a thinking person. She says, I am a Democrat. I am a liberal. She said, but I cannot ignore when somebody does something right.
Right.
Doing something right is not partisan. Doing something right for the country is doing something right for the country. And I think we've got to let all that stuff go. And if we don't necessarily think that Elon Musk is doing everything exactly the way we want, then let's do this. Let's make suggestions about how we should do it then.
Right.
Because in other words, we're just going to bitch to bitch. It was really interesting. He was on Joe Rogan, and since you brought him up,
yeah,
he was on Joe Rogan, and he said, this was never, we could never succeed in the existing system. He said, this is like Star Trek and the Kobayashi Maru. The only way to beat this was to reprogram the Matrix.
Right.
He said, so we reprogramming Washington is the only way we can win this. as the concept in there was when Trump was talking last night about all the people on the Social Security rolls that are wrong. He wasn't saying they were all getting money. He was saying there was a 300-year-old on the rolls.
Yeah.
Somebody who was 300 years old was on the rolls. I mean, come on. Where is the common sense here when you literally have hundreds of thousands of people, okay, over the age of 120?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Which is insane too,
Okay.
because like Social Security didn't start until like the 50s, right?
I mean, this is the whole point that makes no sense. So get in there, prune the system, fix it. There's lots of things that government that are arcane. My son, of course, is a military officer, an army officer, and he's telling me about how the technology from my day to his day has done nothing but make things more complicated.
Right.
Now he has to send an email to like 8 people to get anything done.
Right.
And so what has happened to our system, and again, this is not partisan. It takes way too many pieces of paper. The whole point about computers is it's supposed to liberate us. It hasn't liberated us.
Right.
We've become more indentured to it. Think about this. We have 100,000 employees at the IRS. 100,000. Really?
We need more.
In an age of technology, we need 100,000 people? I'm mystified.
Yeah, it's insane that they think. My problem is this: is that you sit there and you look at the reason why they're so pissed off is because they don't like Trump. It doesn't matter if he did something right. It doesn't matter if Nancy Pelosi had a damn heart attack and Donald Trump went over there and saved her life and did CPR, she would still hate him. She doesn't like him. Right. And so when they do that, they're showing this, and I don't understand. I saw, you scroll through TikTok, and for some reason I'm sure it's because at some point I engaged in it, but like I see Joy Behar talking on The View about how he's out there bragging about how he won the popular vote. He only won by 1.5%. And people are like, oh, 1.5%? That's quite a few people in this country, 1.5%. And the fact of the matter is you can sit there and you can complain about that he won by this amount, but he won. And that's it.
Stephen A. Smith was on The View.
Yeah.
Did you see his clip? And he
did.
basically said, sitting right next to her, he said, hold on a second. Let's get real. He says, I'm a fan of the truth. I'm not a fan of parties. He says, the truth. 89% of the counties switched. Won the popular vote for the first time as a Republican in over 20 years. Won every swing state. He said, I don't care what you think you see. That's a mandate.
Yeah.
And Joy tried to drivel around. He goes, nah. He says, nah. He said, here's the point. The only reason you're saying something that it isn't is to make yourself feel better. Like you don't need to do something different. He says, Democrats, you need to do something different.
Right.
Okay. You need to do something that's pro-country.
Yeah. And I only looked through I was looking just before we got on here because I just kind of wanted to see. I didn't get a chance to watch the speech last night because my wife was working and I had kid duty. And it was crazy that they were talking about the 5 takeaways on one of those articles I was reading. And then it was showing like all these Democrats doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing that they did before he got elected. They're trying to drag him down. They're trying to impeach him. They're trying to do all these things. They're trying to protest. They're trying to make a stink for it. And what they need to do is they need to try to unify as a party, redefine what they're doing because it's obviously not working. It's insane. I saw an article about how they were going to all wear pink for women's rights, yet 100% of them voted to not ban men in women's sports. It's like, it's insane. What the fuck? I mean, that's really where I'm at with this. What the fuck? You're going to say that you're women's rights, but yet you're going to not even vote for women's rights. You're stupid.
Here's the thing. I grew up in a Democratic household. Mm-hmm. Okay. Democrat household, just so we understand that.
A lot different than now.
Pro-union.
Yep.
But that's not the same Democratic Party that I grew up in. Okay. Not at all. I could count on the fact that they were pro-union. I could count on the fact that they were blue collar. I could count on that was the world I saw. That was John F. Kennedy's Democratic Party. What we have now is not. And so it's like this. Listen, you want votes? Are you getting votes just because you're the opposition to a man you don't like?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Eventually you have to be assertive and create policy. Why don't you actually create policy that makes life better for Americans? Listen, as a middle class American, over the last 70 years, we've gotten screwed.
Right.
Absolutely screwed. That's a reality. Now, who's going to change that for us? That's the question we should be asking yourself. I don't really care what banner you fly under.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, you just think about one of the things that is interesting about the Doge thing is that, they found all this money and Elon was like, well, let's give, and I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but he's like, we should give some of this back. Let's give $5,000 back to each American person who we have found this money instead of let's print more money and hand out money to Americans. It's a difference of we found this money that's being wasted. We're going to give it back to the people because it's being wasted. It wasn't used for its purpose. And we're going to give it back to the people who paid the taxes to get it because that's a waste of their money.
Right. I mean, it's like logic, kind of the whole common sense of things. Like, incidentally, the transportation secretary has came out and basically said the plane crashes over the last couple months are pilot error.
Mm-hmm.
No shit. Really? Let me tell you, there's a couple rules of being a pilot. A couple rules. They're real simple rules. Don't run into other aircraft. Take off and land and try to have your plane be reusable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, this sounds silly, but try not to hurt any of the people you're in charge of.
Right.
Okay? This isn't complicated stuff. Now, you can get into the whatever, but the pilot is responsible for that. Mm-hmm. Not air traffic control, none of that. The pilot is responsible. I understand we're not in a world of people being responsible for things, but unfortunately, the person with the stick in their hand is responsible.
Right.
So again, pilot error, not a surprise. I don't know anything about DEI. I don't know anything about training. I don't care about that. What I care about is get the story straight.
Right.
We are responsible. And I heard people being afraid of flying and that. And I said to the whole group, I said, listen, as the pilot in the room, do you understand over the last 50 years, all that flying has gotten is safer? Mm-hmm. And when I mean safer, I mean not marginally safer, exponentially safer. And what you've done is you've let the media concentrate on a couple crashes to scare you.
Right.
And it doesn't have anything to do with the reality. I can point to one event too. And if there's two of them, I can then say it's an epidemic. Doesn't make it an epidemic.
Right.
And so that's one of the battles we're having. I'm a media studies guy right now in my master's program. Uh-huh. One of the things that I'm absolutely embarrassed about is being a media studies guy. Why? Because the fact of the matter is it's so biased that there's not anything going on that's meaningful because we're so biased.
Right.
It's not necessary to be biased. Just let's look at what's going on and and realize where the change needs to take place. And we don't seem to want to do that.
Yeah, they threw out that term objectivity. We've talked about that before, where they have to look at both sides. They just want to look at the one side and make themselves feel good about what they're doing. I mean, that's really what it is. And it's insane because that is what's dragging this down. Like when these people don't clap for people being saved, for people's there's all kinds of things. They're basically throwing that in the face of the parents who have suffered from that stuff. And it's insane. They were talking about Laken Riley and no one in the Democratic Party clapped about that. And it was like at the end of the term that Biden had, he already started to kind of clamp down on the border again. Not that he did much, but he didn't do it. Trump came in day one and freaking locked that thing down. It's and I don't understand. I don't get it. Like when all you do is tune into that one channel And I think, I mean, I didn't really think about it when I was a kid because like we'd always turned on the news and it was Channel 7, which was NBC. And that's what we watched because
Right.
it was a good show and we liked the people that were on there, you know. Brian Gumbo and Katie Couric were on there talking in Good Morning America. And that's all my parents would allow us to watch in the morning when we got up. And it was just crazy because now it's completely different. You just don't see that objectivity anymore. It's all about what side are they on and which one brings in the most views. And so if they lie about it, it doesn't really matter because no one's no one's fact checking them. You know, it's insane to me.
It was fascinating for me growing up because it was very different. Okay. I remember the first time that I was watching Walter Cronkite and he was going to express an opinion. And a chyron came up on the screen that says opinion.
Yep.
Okay. In other words, you couldn't, in their day, you couldn't say anything off of script. In other words, this is what things are. Now, I'm not trying to say that the government didn't have propaganda. They did, because a lot of times they gave the news reporters the facts. Well, the facts were lies. I can't stop that. They weren't at least making it up from the source. They were basically saying, hey, this is what the government reported. Right, wrong. But they didn't make opinion that you didn't see as opinion. They reported the news. This is not a world we're in anymore.
Hmm.
Again, that's a very, very different conception of what we're supposed to see as people. And the point is, I just want the news.
Right.
Just tell me what happened. I'll figure out how I feel about it, what it means. I'll do all that for myself. I'm a fully grown man. I can
Right.
do that. But give
Yeah.
me the facts. And I don't think that's where we want to be anymore. It's like you got to, and people are scared. I've been talking to a new friend, right? And when we first started having conversations, we were actually jockeying and talking to each other in almost code because we didn't know whether we could be honest
Right.
with each other,
Yep.
right? And I'm like, is this really where we've gotten?
Yeah.
That if you've got a liberal view on something that you can't say it, or if you've got a conservative view on something you can't say it, you got to find some middle ground to express your opinion. We
Yep.
don't have to agree on everything, but there's this weird, kind of dance that you have to do with people that you don't know.
Right. And we're kind of still in the middle of that because there is, you know, I feel like when Trump got into office, a lot of things changed, right? There was a lot of woke stuff that was being said, but then a lot of my friends who don't agree with the woke stuff, like just like I do, like why are we doing these things? It was funny how now they're not quite as afraid to say the things that they were saying because if they say them, you got to hide. You can't say it. You can't I can have a different conversation with you than I can have with my sister-in-law because my sister-in-law will go in all attack mode if I say something that she doesn't like. Whereas I just want to have a conversation. I just want to say, well, why do you feel this way? And what is a little bit interesting to me is like all these politicians that are sitting there against all this stuff have been there for a very long time. And I was sitting there thinking like Pelosi's been in the Senate or Congress or whatever she's in for a long time. I mean, I bet you were probably, what, 30, 40 when she got in there? Like she's been in there for a long ass time. And we don't even have term limits on this. But if you go back and you figure out where she stood in the beginning and where she stands now, it's changed because she's doing what she thinks they want. But what I really think is they're just all scared that some truth is going to come out about what they're doing. I mean, the Rogan podcast that you're talking about, I saw a clip of it the other day where Elon was basically afraid to say what's going on with the insider trading because if he does, he could get killed. And that's what he's afraid of because there's so many people that are so corrupt in the government that he could lose his life if he points it out.
Yeah, and that's the struggle we're having as a country is realizing that number one, we can't talk about truth. We can't say that, like, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If we don't think we've had a society that favored white people, then we haven't been paying attention. Of course it did.
Right.
Now, does that mean it needs to change? Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
But government mandating that change, Okay. It's the same thing I was talking to you about with sports. The government shouldn't mandate that the California Angels or the Dodgers only have a $250 million salary.
Hmm.
They shouldn't do that.
No.
We, as the people, need to make these changes. We,
Right. Yeah.
government mandate. Do we need DEI? Yes. But government mandated? No.
Right.
Do we need a more inclusive culture? Absolutely. Right? If you are brown in this country, do you feel different? If you're black in this country, do you feel different? Absolutely. Does that need to change? It absolutely needs to change. But government mandating that change is a huge mistake.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing is like you think about all those stuff. Like when Biden decided that Harris was going to be his running mate, it was I'm going to get a strong black woman, and it was like okay, it doesn't matter what if she's qualified or not. It just matters that she's a strong black woman. That's it.
Right.
So you're not going to go out and find the most qualified person to do the job. You're just going to find one that fits this parameter that you're looking for. Now you've left thousands of people out of that situation, and I don't know. I don't think that's. I understand like like the Rooney rule in NFL where everyone has to they have to interview a black coach. That's part of it, or two black coaches. The reason for that is because they would just leave those people out.
Right.
I get it. So just because you interview them, though, doesn't mean you're going to hire them. And that's the problem. Is like they sit there and they think, well, they got to interview them. Doesn't mean they're going to hire them because they don't fit the parameters. I'm going to tell you as a business owner or someone who works in a small business, if I interview someone and they don't fit the parameters of what I need, I'm not going to hire them. And I'm not looking at their color. I'm not looking at their gender. I'm not looking at anything other than are they qualified to do the job? And that's the problem.
Yeah. And I think that for many in America who come from underrepresented people, whether they be indigenous or otherwise, I think that they feel slighted. They feel less than. I agree. But government mandating it is ridiculous
Right.
because it's not going to get anywhere but corrupt. And that's what we've seen, whether it started back in my day, which was EEOC, Equal Opportunity Commission, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was basically mandating that your, for example, your upper level generals had to have a mix of everything. You can't mandate that.
Right.
What you can say is, okay, how do we give opportunity? How do we give a hand up, okay, to people that have been underrepresented, treated poorly in our society? How do we give a hand up?
Mm-hmm.
Not a hand out. How do we give a hand up? That's what we should be thinking about in how we do things. And the idea that I listened to those Doge comments in the speech, and those are silly. We need to be helping the people here. And if that means that we need to look at how one tribe in Washington was treated or whatever, then let's do that.
Right.
But the idea, where is the hand up, not the hand out? And I think that's what the big complaint is. All these are handouts.
Right.
And we also don't have any metrics. It's like the Department of Education, not, again, to harp on one institution, but you have metrics. Okay, you have metrics in the Department of Education, of which you've failed miserably.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. You've failed miserably. We're not any closer to where we want to be than we were when the Department of Education was created.
Yep.
Okay. What does that mean? That means either you've got to reassess your process or reassess your metrics or something, but you cannot continue to do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. That's where we're at as a culture. Okay.
Yeah,
My biggest concern is that we don't make the right changes because we're so busy going back and forth like a yo-yo between Democrat and Republican that we don't make any real change.
Yeah. The education system is an interesting thing too. Like in Idaho, they just passed a law which one of my friends posted on Facebook. They're like, we're in a sad place in the state of Idaho because now Idaho will be paying for private school for students. And what happened was the governor decided and got it voted in that they're going to give these vouchers to kids who do not go to a public school to go to the private school that they want. Which in my mind, I'm sitting there going, well, that's great. Because if you think about it, if they go to a private school, these parents are sending their kid to a private school. They don't get any funding from the government because it's private. And so now that means that all the funding is generated by the check that they give to the private school in order to run, that comes out of their pocket, yet they're still paying taxes for the public school. So like they're paying for some other kid to go to a public school and they're not getting to use their money to pay for their kid to go to a private school. And I was just amazed at the thought process on that. And what are these regular teachers thinking that teach at a public school? Well, they're going to take away our funding. It shouldn't have been your funding in the first place. That's the problem. It's like, I pay taxes if I want to send my kid to a private school and I want to pay for that. Why shouldn't my tax dollar go to the private school instead of to the public school? And it's pretty common sense to me. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's completely true. And I think what we're struggling with is, again, it is, what kind of quality education are you getting? I mean, that dollar, whoever that dollar came from, is that dollar doing what we need it to do? Is 80 cents of that dollar going to the student's future?
Right.
Okay. I mean, are these teachers doing better and better? I'm still amazed when I hear a teacher that has worked for 20 or 30 years and is still scraping to get by.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I think that's ridiculous. I also have heard stories that when you get 20 and 30 years in the system, they start trying to force you out because you're expensive.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
because you
And
get
I
a
hear
merit raise every year. So as you get tenure, then it costs them more money to pay you.
longevity pay. Yeah. And this is, again, back to the idea, well, I want that teacher with 30 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
If that teacher with 30 of his experience is, you get out and you're 22 years old, that teacher's only 52 years old.
Right.
I like that teacher's 52 years old and still has at least 10 more years and is giving to our students and growing them. I'm all for it. But yet, you're in a budget pinch where you force them out. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, it's insane
again,
too. Like
priorities.
the Percy retirement is, I mean, that's what we have in Idaho. I don't know if that's what they have everywhere else, but in Idaho, they have that Percy retirement, which when you're done, when you retire, you make about the same amount that you do as a teacher. That's great. But you still live in poverty because you lived in poverty before. So there's no like, hey, go do this. It's just, you can still live the same comfortable poverty life you had. Have fun.
Yeah. And again, if we're talking about the seed corn of our next generation, if you were a farmer, just think about it from a farmer's perspective. Are you going to just throw the seed out there and not water it? Or you're not going to take care of it? Or do you, as a farmer, realize that your planting season, that the idea of your harvest depends on your planting season?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in a culture now that wants to harvest, but we don't want to plant.
Right.
If we want to plant, and again, I'm not saying you were a good teacher or a bad teacher,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm saying, why did we lose somebody that spent all that time in education to be a teacher? Why did we lose them to another profession? Couldn't you get at least in the game as far as compensation?
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there. And that's a real challenge for us again, generationally. When I grew up, teachers were very respected. They were reasonably paid versus everybody else. Over the last, in this case, 50 years, that's changed.
Right.
Right? They just haven't kept pace, and that's ridiculous. We would like the best and the brightest to teach.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, like, if I would have made, I probably would have been fine if I would have made the same as my wife, who's a nurse, who, like, now she probably makes around $80,000 a year. I'd have been okay with that because we could have lived on that. But then you find this other job where you make way more than that, and you just get accustomed to that lifestyle, and you're just like, no, there's so much more out there than what you have to offer as a teacher. And I start to weigh the risk and the reward, like when I was working at Les Schwab changing tires versus getting my degree to teach, I'm sitting there going, well, I can make $60,000 here. I can make $40,000 here. I could be barely walking by the time I'm 60, or I could preserve my body and do this. And that was the decision. It was like that. So then you start doing things which coaches are very underpaid and they work a lot of hours for what they get paid to do, where you're trying to supplement the income for what you're doing. So at the time when I quit, I was coaching. I had another part-time job selling clothing, like stuff for teams and things like that, which was good because I was coaching and I kind of get in with those coaches that I worked with. Like you have to do 3 other jobs in order to make ends meet. That's insane.
Right. And again, it's the seed corn of our next generation. If we want our generation to be productive, if we want them to come up with the newest innovations, what kind of education do they need?
Right.
And that's all I'm asking people to reconsider, their next $3 billion sports stadium. Do they do that, or do they invest in teachers?
Yep. Exactly. Well, it's been a great conversation, Robert. I'm glad we got to make this happen, and we should be back Monday, barring any issues. But great conversation as usual. We thank you all for hanging out. We appreciate you being here. Please make sure to like, share, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this. If you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, please go over there and leave a review. It helps us to push it out more. And until next time, I challenge you to find the shape of your success.